A couple of rules around building a good story. One is you never, ever, 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 is that clear? Make the story about the brand, the boss, the company, the product, or the service. The story always has to be told from the point of view of the customer and the frontline employee. It's the story of how they are able to interact so that everyone has successful outcomes.
Hi and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. This is your host Zia at peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for Human Capital Management that's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and channel that receives more than 400,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. With that, let me welcome our guest for today, Mike Wittenstein. Mike is the CEO of Story Miners, the idea behind which is to help customers go beyond the status quo and to have their vision earn the support that it deserves. Since 2002, Mike has been devoted to helping companies tackle change successfully by introducing market-proven methods for making change more profitable and comfortable, improving customer and employee experiences, identifying new revenue streams, encouraging accountability amidst the chaos, and as well as keeping people on the same page. So Mike, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure. And you know, I wrote that, but I realized when you speak it, that is a very long sentence.
Yeah, but I think it does you justice and it explains a lot of what you do. So it's rightly so.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Where would you like to start today?
So I'd like to start, with Story Miners. It sounds extremely interesting. So I would love for you to kind of tell us how you came about the idea and how does it help businesses today?
Sure. Well, the idea, I think, let me start over. When people come up with new ideas about what to do in their life or what to do with their life, whether they're employed by a company in HR or whether they're an entrepreneur, I think it's not just a single decision that they make. I think they look at the past of their entire life and they start to package that and they start to see, where am I headed next? Where does what I want to learn with what I'm good at, with what the world needs, where do those three things kind of intersect? So that's what happened for me. I had started a digital agency. It was one of the first in the world back in the 90s. And that might sound pretty cool, but anybody who started one back in the 90s was one of the first in the world. And then I went to work for IBM as their e-visionary. And at that point, I learned a lot about customer experience, a lot about systems thinking, and I really wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help companies change more easily. So in a conversation with my friend Tom Milkovic, he now lives in California, we still work together once in a while, we were talking about how important it is for a brand to know who it is, for the people inside of it to have a clear and a focused and a singular understanding of what the brand is there to do. That's why we named the company Story Miners. It's all about finding out who you are and what you're capable of, what value you create for others. It's very purposeful, if you will. So I got into it because I wanted to help companies change. But what I found out is that being in the business of story miners, helping people find their stories, helping them change, actually affected me. I had no idea when I was getting into this, the change that having the company and working toward these goals would have on me. And I got caught up in my own hero's journey. Not that I'm a hero, but you know, the pattern of like Harry Potter or Ulysses or, you know, any Superman, any famous person, you take a dip after you've hit rock bottom, if you will, and then you go through a series of challenges and you come out transformed. And through that process of transformation, you acquire new skills and abilities that give you more capability in the world. So Story Miners made me grow. It made me work really, really, really hard to get to things that I never expected. So that was the unexpected benefit of it from a personal note.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, the fact that you set out to do something that you love, and then now you enable other organizations to find their purpose. That's very deep driven motto to kind of have your company in. And I think we need more of that, in today's time, where people look for purpose rather than just profit. So
You're speaking my language.
so yeah, that's pretty amazing.
I just wanted to share with you one of my other favorite phrases. I use purpose and profit as well. But when you're designing your business, when you're pushing forward, when you're finding the future, you have to balance profitability with humanity. You've got to make sure that the way you're going about creating that profit is good for the people inside the company, good for the people on the outside, good for the shareholders. And that's why I think design is so important, because we usually just kind of build something onto what we've had in the past. We call it incremental gains or being more efficient or improving ROI. But now in particular, there's so much change in the world. A lot of change is happening to us, but as individuals and as companies, we're forcing change on others because we change what we're asking for. So I think what the world needs to do, and this is where HR is so well positioned, and I'm so excited to be partners with you guys, is that I lost my train of thought. Sorry. It's that design, remember now, it's that we need to use more design in our problem solving. We can't just look at the things that are available to us and move them around and try to make one a little better, one a little faster, one a little bit cheaper. We have to look at what our business owes our clients and what we owe our employees. And we need to come up with a new design sometimes that actually meets all of those needs. And it's usually possible. That's the cool thing about design. The barrier that a lot of people need to break through in their own minds is that they can have what they want. They might not get it the same way. Like with Story Miners, I did not get exactly what I wanted. I got more than what I needed. It's been amazing. And that same thing, I think, can happen at a corporate level. I've seen it happen with clients. Sorry to take the questioning away. Your turn.
No, not at all. I mean, I think the current model that doesn't focus on people or, all the stakeholders and the things that they reap out of it isn't even sustainable in the long run. There's a lot, that needs to change in that area. And as, more people start thinking the way you do, I really do think that change is going to start being seen, and hopefully it comes before the whole system collapses, because I think there is it can't always keep progressing in that sense. But speaking of, change, that kind of moves me on to my next question. So change is the bane or boon of, today's world. Ideas are what make the world go around. But what are some tips that, in your experience, help in convincing stakeholders internally?
That's a lot of questions in one. But let's start with the word convince and unpack that. Tell me what you mean by convince. I know the definition of the word, but just where are you coming from on that?
So I guess if you're talking about pushing people towards a particular model that would be more, let's say, for example, less profitable for the organization, but more purposeful. If there is, let's say, some level of resistance, not resilience, in an organization from stakeholders, if you were to kind of, move towards a certain, internally, if you needed to kind of move stakeholders.
Okay, I gotcha. All right. Well, as a quick aside, resilience is the same thing as resistance, just applied in the other direction.
Fair.
Yeah, when people are pushing back on your ideas, they're resisting. But when you're managing amidst all the change that others are pushing, you're being resilient. It's a question of perspective. And I know I'm slicing, fine definitions of the word. I think I understand what you're really asking. So let's go back to the intent of your question. When you're trying to bring about change, what are some things that you can do? In my opinion, and in my practice, now this isn't for everybody, because Story Miners works well with some kinds of companies and not well with others, so let's not make this a generalization. Instead of trying to change other people, which is where I picked up on the word convince, like I'm going to convince you of my way of doing things. It's kind of like in our political system in the United States. For those of you listening later, we just elected a Democratic president after a very rough spread with a Republican president. When you're trying to change other people, the implication, where that's coming from is the other people are wrong or they need to adjust. And I've met so many clients, so many managers who've said, you know what, we need some change. And what they really mean is other people need to change. Not me. Other people have to change. That's why we need change management. Well, the reality is the limit to change is how much the leaders are capable of changing. And the best leaders are the ones that are able to model that and use that as evidence for others that the path towards somewhere new is safe and possible. What we like to do at Story Miners is not foist change on others, not push them into something that they know nothing about without enough support, but we like to help them see the future clearly and create their part of it. So one of my favorite approaches, and for years we've been generating new kinds of approaches, new tools. It's a prototyping tool that we call Future Story. And all it is instead of telling people why they need to change, it's giving them a clear picture of what the change state of the business will look like, feel like, smell like, taste like. It's a very 360-degree perspective in the future. And then they can look back at today and go, oh, I see how to get there. And by the way, I have a couple of ideas on how we could do that better. So that shift to storytelling rather than forcing makes a huge difference. And it gets everybody involved in bringing their very best talents. It might be what they're used to using on their job, and it might be a latent capability that nobody knew they had, and they're able to bring that to the table, volunteer, pitch in, and make things real. So that is one of the most exciting things that we've stumbled across, and it's all based on story. And as humans, we're all wired to hear stories. We learn from stories. We like to share stories. So here's the summary, instead of pushing people, let them write their own story with them in it as you go forward. I know that sounds simple. There are probably some more questions after that.
No, I mean, I really, I think that's a very realistic and interesting approach, because I think change is something that, we all kind of are afraid of to some extent as well. And when you can see where it's taking you, it kind of takes away that fear of getting into it. So
exactly. When people they're afraid of what they don't know. And most times when change is communicated, and I'd say most times is a fair generalization in this count, it's not given with a sense of what does that change mean to you. It's more from a corporate perspective. So our brand is the hero. Our leader is the hero. Our team is the hero. Our products are the hero. People on the front lines are the heroes. And if you just you flip the storytelling so that it's about the people on the front line who have to make it work, that's the focal point. And even in a customer experience world where you want the customer to be the focus of everything, when it comes to change, you have to start from the inside and work out. So start with your frontline people, make the story about them, answer the questions that they're going to have, make their jobs easier, find out what they want to learn and where they want to lean in, and make that part of the design. That lets the organization it creates kind of a cult following, and everybody wants to be on board as opposed to feels forced to do something that they don't understand or don't like. I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes complete sense. Like, it does start from within. So you kind of touched upon customer experience, and I want to know, how do you think the world of customer experience has changed according to you, and where do you think we're heading in that space?
Customer experience about 20 years ago was a brand new term. Nobody really heard of customer experience. It made sense just to put the two words together, the customers, '(S) experience. Kind of get that. But now it's getting a lot of attention. Frederick Reichheld wrote a book called The Ultimate Question. It's now in a second title with the, multiple editions in many languages. And the idea was to focus on what it was that customers, liked the most. What was it that would cause repatriation? Why would they share a little bit about that business in a positive way with their friends? And what happened is that idea of focusing on customer experience as a starting point for improvement and change got a little bit twisted around in some cases. Some companies did wonderfully with it. Some got I think the British phrase is caught up in their knickers. They got all confused because they started focusing on metrics and they forgot to think about people. There are a lot of products and tools and methodologies right now that focus a lot on the numbers because our general way of doing business in the world is to figure out if something is going to squeeze more money out the end of a spreadsheet. And we line up everything according to profit. Well, the problem with that is when from a design perspective, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with making a profit. Everybody should do that because that's what creates growth and introduces new products and opportunities and expansion of ideas. I'm a big fan of profit. I would like more for myself as well and for my company. But from a design perspective, if you focus on profit, you're strangling the other parts of your business that have needs. So if you're trying to create a better customer experience, but at the same time you're trying to save costs, who's going to win? The accounting people always win. So you end up with everybody spending a lot of time and effort and not a lot getting done. So where I'm hoping customer experience can move 2021 and forward is more in the direction of putting the design of experiences ahead of profit taking. Now, both need to happen. Very few people can see how to do both at the same time because we just don't know how to do that. Nobody has that vision of the future. You can't, nobody can truly see the future. So you have to kind of step in, and if you lead with design and you make things right for your customers and your people, if you deliver more value to your customers as an outcome of being in business, you get more of everything that you need. You get more resource, more money, you get more word of mouth, you get more interest, your advertising costs drop because advertising is really a tax on bad brands. Think about it. Right? So once you get that design thing working, then the bean counters can come in and start optimizing. And if you do it in that order, and I've seen this a number of times, there's so much more to optimize, but you do it in the direction of creating more value for your customers. When you do that, people stay employed. Employees and customers start talking about things a little bit more. Ideas for new services, products, and ways of work happen more quickly and easily, and change hurts a lot less. So where I hope things go is that we put design first, let it inform that cascade of how do we make the business more efficient. Otherwise, you're just kind of choking the air out of your new thing.
Absolutely. That balance is key, I guess, to success. And let's hope that the whole customer experience revolutionizes in a way where that balance is focused on. The next question I have for you is on partnerships, actually. What's your secret behind building successful partnerships?
That's something I know really well because we've done this a few times. Sometimes it doesn't work too, to be quite honest, but the takeaways from this are, first, to understand your partner's client's needs. If you don't understand that, it can't work. It just can't, because you're basically looking at two companies serving one customer. It's usually the definition of the partnership. So without understanding that, you really can't go forward. The second thing is you need to understand what your partner is trying to do. Partnerships are always wonderful. They're like romantic relationships filled with whatever those brain chemicals are, serotonins, endorphins, whatever. I don't know the names of the brain chemistry, but you kind of get this feeling of falling in love. And the same thing happens with companies. But what happens over time, just like in a marriage or a friendship or a business partnership, is one company's priorities tend to change a little bit and they start going in slightly different direction, but they don't tell their partner. So their partner continues on path, or maybe they have a slight change in direction. And then it starts to tear at the fabric of what's going on. I'm sure you've kind of seen that before. Things get old with age or they just don't work. So the challenge is to make sure that your partnership runs on a moral code. So what we do at Story Miners, and I'm not saying this is a panacea for everyone, it might not work in all cases, but we create a teaming agreement that's non-binding. So it's not a commercial agreement. It has no teeth in court, so to speak, but it's all about the morals of how we're going to work. It's where the executives have a chance to share their beliefs about priorities, informing the other side, being honest, What do you do if something bad happens? Do you want us to bring a solution? Do you want us to alert you? What's the deal? So getting to the point where you can have a real honest conversation about the tough part of running your business, mano a mano, as they'd say in Italian, makes a lot of sense. And it also makes the businesses stronger together. And the last thing, contractually, we tend to create our partnerships like Velcro. Velcro is that sticky material, like the hooks and the loops, and when you stick it together, it's really strong. And when you pull it apart, it makes that kind of noise. Well, most partnerships come apart at some time. How many do you know that are more than 10 years old, 50 years old, 100 years old? They tend to morph, they tend to change. So pre-plan how you're going to extricate yourself from the other so that your client outcomes never fail and your people aren't disappointed. If you design around that in advance, then it's so much easier to manage the partnership.
You pointed out this thing about how you should focus on priorities, and discussing those kind of aspects, like being honest and communicating. And I think in business relationships, sometimes we forget that it's not always a transaction. It's not always just about a certain percentage or a certain value. Sometimes it's so much more than that for it to work. And that kind of, when that's not your focus, it automatically becomes a byproduct. So yeah, those were some very, very key points that, I'm sure people are going to really appreciate hearing and hopefully get inspired by, and it'll help them build partnerships as well.
Well, it sounds like these are a lot of your thoughts as well, so maybe I should interview you next time.
Well, I absolutely agree with a lot of things that you did say today. And I think it's really, wonderful to hear about all your experiences and, especially considering all the experiences you've had and all the knowledge that you've gained. It's really inspiring to listen to these things.
Sounds good.
So lastly, how do you build a good story?
All right, a couple of rules around building a good story. One is you never, ever, 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 is that clear? Make the story about the brand, the boss, the company, the product, or the service. The story always has to be told from the point of view of the customer and the frontline employee. It's the story of how they are able to interact so that everyone has successful outcomes. That's the missing piece for a lot of strategies. They have lots of numbers and charts, and they talk about the expected benefits of blending this company with that one, or adding these capabilities, or buying that company, or growing this product line. But rarely is it taken down past the point of, oh yes, this will reduce our costs or increase our sales. Well, how is that going to happen? What would you like your employees to model their behaviors after? How are they going to need to look for information in new places, make decisions in new ways? What's the timbre or the tone of interactions with customers going to be like? If the future includes, for example, working with chatbots or artificial intelligence or guides for your salespeople online so that they know who they're talking to and what their history with the company is, how is that going to feel? How are you going to find out about that? What voice are you going to have? I know that's more questions than you asked, but the point is, if you think through things from that employee's and that frontline customer's perspective, you'll know what to put in the story. It's all the little questions that they have. How is it going to be in the future? How am I going to feel? Who am I going to work with? We have a process for thinking through all of those things. We basically use the customer experience approach to detail how things are going to work, and then we write the story about it. So I guess I would say the customer experience of the future comes before the story of the future. But when you have those two things, you've got a very easy to understand answer, and it's one that people can vote with their energy on. They can say, yes, I would like to do that.
Story.
If people respond well to it, if they go, because you start with a story and then you share it with a small group, you find out what they like and don't like, what they understand and don't understand. It's like software. You do your first rev with a very small audience, then you leak it out to your beta users and then to a larger population, and then it goes live, and then it goes to the public. That might be your model. You do the same thing with story. You're constantly iterating. And what you're looking for when you're using stories for change is adoption. So what I look for is when people spend less time trying to understand what I'm saying. What does the story about? If they don't spend time on that, but they're wondering, how is it going to work for them? That's a good sign. And an even better sign is when they tell me, Mike, I think when we launch this new thing, whatever it is, we should do this. When they come up with their own ideas, that's when the story's working, because we've moved from introduction to understanding and awareness to, yes, I'm on board with that, to, hey, I want to be a part of that. So I look for the needle to move all the way over here and make sure that people go, yes, and I have an idea. That's the best sign for me of all.
Understood. And I guess that's one essential way to kind of make sure, because it is quite important to know if your story is good or not, to kind of implement it. And I guess including other people in the narrative is one, key aspect. So Mike, as an HR director, if you had to say what's the most important thing you can do when you're writing a change story or a story for change, what would it be?
The most important thing is to not write the entire story. If you think you know what it is to 100%, keep that in your head while you're writing, but only write 90% of the story. And here's why. Your people, the frontline people who are reading your story about the future, need to make their own discovery. And they need to figure out where they fit in that world of the future. So if you set a clear direction, if you provide some operating parameters, some written rules of the road, if you will, some principles that are irrevocable, they start to think along those lines. That's half of the change work. But then when they get closer to understanding where they sit in this new organization, what their responsibilities are, and they have to figure something out, all of a sudden it engages their imagination. They start to think emotionally about what's going on. How is this going to affect me? How am I going to be able to help my customers? How will I be working with my colleagues? Don't give them everything. Make them work a little bit for it, because that's where they get to bring their very best selves. And that's what actually makes it work. That's what makes it exciting. That's what gets people to adopt willingly, as opposed to digging in their heels and resisting what you're doing. So that honest to God is the secret.
Thank you for that. Those were also some very, very key aspects to take into consideration. I would love to know, who are some brands that tell great stories?
Okay. The brands that tell good stories are the ones that give you this amazing emotional feeling and make you want to be in their places or with their products and services. So you can probably answer that as well as I can. I grew up in Orlando, in the state of Florida, in the United States, and that's where Disney World was. So I was born just before Disney World opened, so I had a chance to see the whole thing and watch all the stories. But Disney, the man, Walt Disney, as well as the company, Walt Disney Company, have done an amazing job at storytelling. In fact, they use the storytelling metaphor in their operations. When you go to get a job at Disney, you go to the casting center. When you go to work above ground, because they have an underground too, you're on stage. So everything is about storytelling. They even use a phrase called stay in the story. For example, when you're in Tomorrowland and you put your hand on a banister and you're walking along in a line, it's made of smooth stainless steel, and you can't feel any of the joints where the different pieces of metal have been welded together. Everything is smooth and cool and fresh. When you're in Frontierland and you put your hand on a banister, it feels like you're holding wood, like an old post, from tying up a horse. So everything is in the story. Tesla's done an amazing job of telling its stories with those videos of people who are in the cars when they go very fast, with the design videos that they've used showing how the car actually responds to you. One of the first Tesla stories that I heard was actually a visual. Somebody moved their hand toward the side of the car, and the handle actually came out to meet them. It anticipated their needs. And that's a very Japanese design technique, anticipating your client's needs and being ready for them. So that permeates the Tesla experience. And I'm sure you can find a video clip of that to show. Apple's done a very good job with its storytelling as well. And from the time they did the 1984 first Macintosh ad until they did the design ad from several years ago, Apple on Design, to some of their more recent pieces, especially a while ago they had the Mac versus the PC. These are all stories that got people involved in how will that product make you feel? How will it make you better? How will it support you? And what will you be able to do that you had never been able to do before? All those questions were answered. And most marketing literature can't even begin to address those kinds of needs that customers bring. But all those companies have produced such an amazing story of expectations about the future experience you'll have and the effect of the transformation they'll bring to you that people just flock to them and they're willing to pay a premium. So I think part of it is they've got a great business model. They understand their audience well. They've got a solid customer experience, and they tell an amazing story.
Those are some very, very, reputable brands you mentioned out there, and some very, very key insights on their work. So, yeah, those are very, very interesting things to learn about. What are some smaller companies, and what is it that they do instead?
Well, it's not about what they do instead. It's about what can they do. And smaller companies actually can do just as well as the big companies. It's just that we don't hear about them as often. So one of the firms that I know of that's not a client of mine did something very, very clever. I believe it's the Danish garbage company. Okay? In Denmark, when they go pick up the garbage, customers were complaining a lot about how the cans were full and they started to smell bad, or the garbage would overflow onto the sidewalk. Well, the engineers took a look at everything and they said, we have plenty of capacity. We have trucks, they're going out on a regular schedule, and there's no reason that we shouldn't have more garbage in the trucks than on the ground. So what they did is they put sensors inside the garbage cans, and they relayed that information every morning to the drivers so they would know which cans to go pick up and which could wait until their next visit. And that became an amazing story because almost overnight, not really overnight, but they didn't have to spend any more money, but customer satisfaction shot through the roof because there was no more spilled garbage on the side. As the cans were getting full, the sensor would alert the drivers to go pick up that can. But if another one were empty, it didn't need to go over there. So there was plenty of resource to go around. We've done projects with people in optical, healthcare, glasses, personal services, professional services, just a wide variety of things. And the story of how they are making their change and what their new thinking is usually happens after we do the design, but it quickly rushes forward and they get a tremendous benefit, just like Disney and Apple and some of the other big brands do. The effect is exactly the same. So what happens is instead of having to pay for advertising, the customers push those stories forward, which is pretty cool. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. It definitely does. And yeah, I mean, that was a very, very interesting story you told out there. It's good to know, on the flip side, how smaller businesses kind of take things ahead too. So, thank you for speaking with us today, Mike. It was a great conversation, and I wish you and your business all the very best. I really value all the insights you gave us, and I'm very grateful I had this opportunity to speak with you.
Great to spend some time with you too, Zia.